Just a few minutes ago, I had seen red light in the room, and now I'm also seeing a beautiful golden white pillar that has appeared in the room from saying the prayer, which feels to me like a very beautiful channel between us and Source. Okay, Ahonu, are you ready to go with the first question?
Yes, our first question today. What is Source's definition of consciousness?
All right. The first thing Source is saying is that it is the ability to know yourself and to know me. What it feels like is that inherent in that answer, when it says the ability, it feels that consciousness is something that is almost like embedded in us in a foundational way. The ability to become conscious or to have consciousness. And it's really emphasizing the word ability. So it feels very much that it doesn't mean that everything has consciousness automatically, but what it does mean is the ability to have it seems to be inherent in all life forms. So it's interesting too that it's talking about the ability to know ourselves and to know Source, because that implies there is a purpose to consciousness. That's what it feels to me, that the purpose of consciousness is to know yourself and to know Source. So it's also saying it's really the ability to be alive and awake, to be aware of surroundings. It involves the ability to perceive definition, form, structure, order, to perceive knowledge, to have knowledge, to love, to extend love. All right, so let's go on then.
Our next question. Where or how did consciousness originate?
Well, Source is saying consciousness originated from it. The actual answer is it originated from the I am. And the I am is Source's definition of itself. So it originated in the I am. Inherent in the I am is consciousness. So the answer really is Source is saying it originated from it, from Source itself.
How do we think?
Source is saying that we think from our I am presence. In the I am presence is the ability to think. It's another thing that seems to be inherent in the qualities of the I am self. What I hear Source saying is you think by God awareness, and I find that's an interesting answer, by God awareness, because if we didn't have a part of us somewhere within that was, what it's saying is that there's a part of us that does have an awareness of God, inherent, built into us. And if it weren't for that, we would not be able to think. So I find that answer extremely interesting.
Is the mind and consciousness one and the same thing?
That's another good question. So Source is saying no, the mind is the alter ego. It's saying the alter ego is the act of perception. Perception is the view of reality and differs with each person. The mind came into being through varying degrees of self-awareness. And what this feels like, picture that I'm getting is that even though everything has consciousness inherent within it, not everything is awake to consciousness. In other words, there's varying levels of consciousness inside all life, everywhere. And it's distinguishing mind and consciousness from each other in the sense that it's saying, the mind seems to be something that could have been invented by perceiving, the whole act that we perceive, that we look outside ourselves and see things. So it looks to me that we build up a false self, which it's calling the alter ego, by perception. And this is the mind that Source is talking about. Our views of reality seem to be dependent upon each of us in terms of how we perceive and at what level of awareness we're at. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Source then, what's the difference between the ego and the alter ego? Because we hear about the ego all the time. So just a second. What Source is saying is that the true ego is the self that it created. The alter ego is the self that gets created, through limited awareness and perceptions. So I find that interesting. It's implying that there is a true ego, probably would be in capital letters, I'd say, that is the self, capital S, that Source created. In other words, the original beingness coming out of Source. That truth that is inherent in us is what it's saying, but that we don't realize. So I think it's because we're all at varying states of awareness, and you need awareness to become self-realized. And because we're all at different places of that, our perceptions of ourselves and what is true, in a way, gets made up. It gets made up by us until we come to true God realization. And that could take, I don't know, many, many lifetimes, I suppose. Okay, so it's differentiating between the true ego, or the capital S self, and the alter ego, which would be something that gets made up by limited awareness and perception.
What then is reality?
Reality. Right, well, it's saying that true reality is the I am. The I am presence, the I am self is true reality. That nothing else is really real. Now it's qualifying that and saying that our limited perceptions and ideas about what we can be aware of at any given time makes up realities, and I would probably call them small r. Makes up realities, makes up dimensions, makes up planes of existence even. And it's the alter ego self that's doing this, because it doesn't have a full God realization awareness. So its definition of reality, true reality, is the I am presence. When you arrive back to knowing yourself as I am, that's the true reality. Okay? And inherent in that true reality is awareness of and knowledge of everything. I mean, you are it. You know yourself as it. And that's true reality. Anything up until that point comes from limited perceptions and a limited sense of awareness. So therefore, it's not real in the way Source is talking about it. It's also letting us know that these limits in perception and awareness not only make up varying realities, because the truth is that all thought is creative on some level. It makes up various realities. It makes up various planes of existence. Again, it makes up the planes of existence after death even. So I find that quite an interesting answer, Ahonu.
What is actuality?
All right, well, Source is saying that actuality is what you create in your experiences, in your ideas and your perceptions. In other words, we all have the ability to be creative. So you could say that actuality is what you actualize, or what you manifest, I suppose, is another way to say that. But it's something that we do ourselves with our creative abilities. All right, well, Ahonu's looking at something. There's another question here. How does reality and actuality relate to consciousness? So Source is saying they relate in the process of becoming self-aware, or on the journey to knowing, or on the journey to self-realization, they're, okay, so I guess the best way I could describe this is it looks like we're all on this journey, even though I know we read in lots of places that there is no journey because we're already the I am presence, and that's true. Okay? But we are really all at such different levels of knowing about that. So it's saying that these things relate to consciousness in the fact that they are helping become more self-aware, at least we would hope so, on the journey to being the I am. So it's about the process of becoming self-aware, which is where they relate. And I think, too, because we were talking about actuality in the sense of what we manifest, I think playing with manifestation, or even coming to the place where you realize that you can manifest and you can create experiences Even that is part of the journey on the way to knowledge. And you won't stay there, though, because there will be a time after you play with manifesting for a while that you'll naturally want to seek for something deeper. In other words, the satisfaction that you think you'll get from manifesting things will be temporary. You won't be lasting, and that doesn't make it wrong, because it does look like it's part of the waking up process. But it's just that you'll go deeper and deeper into inquiry. And so that's how these things relate, is like they're all little stepping stones on the way.
Okay. What is the subconscious?
The subconscious. Source is saying the subconscious is what you've decided is true, but are not aware of. And let me explain that, because I know what it's saying, okay? It's basically saying that throughout our experiences in our lives, we make conclusions. We have experiences, we react to them a certain way, we come to certain decisions about life and what we think is true about reality. And so we make these decisions or conclusions, and then we go on. It's like life goes on. The next moment happens, and then the next moment, to the point where we forget what we decided about reality. And that's what Source is telling us the subconscious is. It's what you've decided is true, but are not aware of.
What is the unconscious?
The unconscious, yeah, there seems to be lots of confusion about the subconscious and unconscious. Okay, just a second. Well, Source is saying that the unconscious is that which denies it is. So it almost seems like a decision too, like deciding to be unconscious is deciding to deny who you are or what is. And the what is, to me, can be on a lot of levels, really. I mean, if we go to the highest, it could be a part of us that denies God within us, and that could play itself out on so many levels. It could also just come down to, the part of us that denies what's true in our present reality, and what's going on in our lives or our relationships or ourselves. So it seems to be a part that actually actively decides that it doesn't want to know something, is really what I'm getting out of this.
Our next question. What determines what we think about?
What determines what we think about? Source is saying your individual perception and also divine inspiration. So it sounds to me like our own perceptions formulate what we think about or what we focus on. But it also seems to be a mechanism inherent with us that we receive divine inspiration. So I am seeing thoughts or ideas come down from higher beingness or higher levels of awareness to us. So both of those things seem to be a factor in what we think about, what comes into our awareness as thoughts.
And following on from that question, how does thinking work?
How does thinking work? These are tough ones, Ahonu. Just a second. Thinking works by awakening to consciousness. And that's interesting, because the feeling I have when I get that answer is that thinking seems to be a result, the process of being able to think or formulate thoughts or be aware of thoughts seems to come from consciousness itself that is embedded inside of us, but only when consciousness is being awakened. So it seems to be determined by what level of consciousness you have, or what level of the awakening of consciousness is happening inside of you. So that is the answer to that one, huh?
I've always wanted to know the answer to that.
Have you?
I have.
An interesting question.
Yes, indeed. Okay, our next question. What generates thinking?
That sounds like a question you'd ask, huh? What generates thinking?
I know, that's typically one of mine.
Okay, what generates thinking? Well, Source is saying light and sound generated. I feel like we're kind of back in the mechanics of the process now, but it's basically saying it gets generated by light and sound, very simply.
Do animals think?
So it's kind of an interesting answer because I'm actually getting that yes, most animals do think, but I feel like they're not aware of formulating thoughts. In other words, or maybe it's how we formulate thoughts and we actively decide something. It just seems to me that the thinking process doesn't go that far with animals, but I do perceive thoughts in the sense of, if you talk to a dog psychically, it would definitely have an opinion. It definitely observes. It definitely feels certain ways about things. So sources saying, yes, most animals do think, just that the process of thinking seems to be limited for them. That's interesting, isn't it? And this kind of goes back to what we've been talking about when Source is talking about things having different levels of consciousness or different levels of awakening. So it looks like it's a process. Thinking also seems to be part of that. The ability to think and reason, let's say. And I wouldn't say animals have a complicated process of reasoning. It seems like that's where they might not go that further step into reason like we can.
And the next logical question to follow that, of course, is, do plants think?
Do plants think? Well, what I'm hearing is some do and some don't. And again, I think it's based on the same info we've been getting already. Some do and some don't. Some have awareness. But I think, again, what's missing here is the ability to reason. And also, animals and plants would not be receiving divine inspiration. It doesn't look like their thinking processes are to that point. But a plant would have awareness. It might have less than an animal, but it would have a certain level of observation and awareness, which Source is also calling thinking.
Does everything have consciousness?
Does everything have consciousness? Well, interesting. Source is saying no, and I'll have to explain this. It's saying that some things have history, not consciousness. Some things are inert collections of history and have not gained consciousness. And these types of things seem like they only gain consciousness by, I'm getting an image of I think the best example I'm getting is like, I feel like I'm looking at a rock, for example. Okay? And even though Source is saying that life itself has consciousness embedded into it, the potential for self-realization. Okay? If I'm looking at a rock, for example, it looks like a rock could have come into being by a collection of other things around it. In other words, it's funny because some things look like they're made just as things being pulled to it or it being pulled to another thing. And there is a level here of form that it's calling inert. In other words, it doesn't seem to have the ability to tap into any level of consciousness as it becomes dense. So that's why it's saying it's a collection of history. In other words, it would have gathered remnants along the way, but it's still too compact or dense to have the self-ability to awaken. I find this interesting because it's giving me a picture of things exploding, that something like that would have to either implode or explode on itself and almost become shattered and go back to light before it would be able to have the potential to begin a journey of consciousness awakening. A very interesting answer, isn't that, Ahonu?
Absolutely. My God, this is amazing. And the next question, which has come down to us, of course, through history, when the likes of all the great philosophers and that, when they were talking about know thyself. What does it mean to know thyself?
Well, knowing thyself is coming to the awareness of the I am. That's simple and logical based on what we're being told so far. That's really what it's all about. It's all a journey of awakening to the true self, the truth of who you really, really are. I find this really interesting because when we look at the whole word journey, this journey to the I am presence, especially since Source just talked to us about certain forms not having enough consciousness potential in them to even be on a journey. unless something acts upon them. So I find that pretty interesting. And I think that is part of this process of consciousness, is that things do act upon us, in other words. I think what's different, seems to be different in a human, for example, is that it has evolved in consciousness potential enough to be able to think, to be able to reason, to be able to receive divine inspiration or higher knowledge. But it also gets acted upon by other things. In other words, we're having this conversation today, so we're being acted upon. Our consciousness is being acted upon by higher information from source, which will stimulate more awakening in us, hopefully. Or you could read a good book, or go to a seminar, or go through some tragedy. But we do get acted upon by other things. And so that process of being catalyzed by other things that we are in relationship with in the cosmos and in our world seems to also stimulate the potential for more awakening. And I do think this is where the alter ego would come in and, possibly mess things up for people, because, people who have built a really strong alter ego, or, created this sense of identity that's based on perceptions and, let's say, dogmas and beliefs, or they've come to conclusions about the experiences in their lives. They've created this other self that's not the I am self. So, it does seem like on this journey, you come to a place of awakening where you realize you've got to disassemble all of that. And this is where I think a lot of people are in the path, is they're disassembling teachings and beliefs and dogmas, and they're understanding that ultimately, you have to go within and find it. It's not necessarily, the actualization of that, or the realization of your true self is something you come upon on your own. It's nothing anybody can give you. It's something you have to come to. So I think ultimately, in this journey of awareness, we build up a false self as a human, and then there's a point where you can continue a whole entire lifetime just in a false self. And again, Source is not judging that, because it views, every aspect of life as valid and important. Some things can take you further to self-awareness, or some things can take you further away from it. But ultimately, you end up still searching. It can be described as when somebody has this inner gnawing, gnaws at them constantly, where they're constantly, feeling that, where they are isn't enough, or where they are isn't working, or they're missing something, or they're lost, or they're stuck. Those are all inner promptings to say, yes, you're right. You're ready for the next piece. You're ready for the next step. So there's a lot of aspects of this journey in terms of building up a false ego, then having to take it down and going within. And in between that is playing around with manifesting. So there's a lot to this, but I feel Source is putting this in perspective for us and saying that the journey's end, or the culmination, really is when you finally become or realize your true self. And that's an experience. That's something you come to. So until that happens, we're on a journey. It's the best way I can explain it. It's like, it reminds me too of the last chapter in my first book, A Time of Change, when we were talking about the true organic self and the decision to go home, capital H. We could say that that's the same thing, really, is that until we get to a place within ourselves where we make a decision that we've had enough of the alter ego and its planes of existence and its false realities, we're done experiencing on those levels, and we really just want to know what home is. Until we truly, naturally get to that place, we will keep reincarnating. We'll still have lifetimes. We may still have lifetimes on other dimensions and on other planets. And so I'm mentioning that because I want you to realize how big this is, how big this whole evolvement into into home really is. You know, you only end up home back in your true self when you really have gone through all these other things and found them wanting. And you get to a place where you say, I just want to know who I really am. I just want to go home to the truth. And Source is saying that it has to be a natural process. It can't be forced. It really has to come from really being done with experiencing or wanting to experience. And that means accomplish too, you know, any of these desires we have to accomplish this or learn that or gather this or express, it's all inherent in there. And again, I don't see, there's nothing wrong with any of this. Nothing wrong with it at all. I think it's all parts of the package on the journey home. Many experiences, many ponderings, you know, things like that. You know, what makes, in other words, we'll go to the next question in a minute, but what makes a person want to go meditate, for example, or want to turn inward? You know, it's because you get to the place where you understand that that's only where you're going to find real answers, is by going internal. Now, there is a way, when you get to a certain level of consciousness awakening, there is a way where you start to see the connections between your outer world and your inner world. And usually that has to do with looking outward and seeing reflections of your beliefs. Or, you know, it can be where you've asked a question of a higher part of you and you see it answered, either internally as something you receive as an answer, or, you know, somebody externally will bring you the answer. So you start to be aware of the relationship that the inner is the outer, and then you understand that the content of your own subconscious is creating part of your external experiences, and you go through all that process of finding out about that, and then once you start to tear that down, okay, then your desires change. You know, what you desire begins to be at a higher level. So I hope I'm getting the point across of consciousness is inherent in all life, the potential, but it isn't actualized and self-realized in all things.
Our next question, Aingeal Rose. What is the nature of dreams? Do we leave our bodies and enter a stream of higher self? Can we use our dreams to create an amazing life? And if so, how?
There's actually going to be a whole chapter in my new book about dreams, because we did do a topic, I don't know where it was it Ireland, I think, Ahonu, on dreams? Okay, so
yes,
there will be a whole chapter on dreams in the next book when it finally comes out next year. Okay, so just a minute. Can you read all of that, just the first part of it, because there's a few questions in there. Huh?
Yeah, there's a few questions lumped in together there.
The nature of dreams.
What is the nature of dreams?
Well, sources say that dreams, they have many levels to them, actually, but it is the ability of your spirit self to leave your body temporarily at night, not completely, and go off to other dimensions or realities, really to learn, but also to be regenerated. Okay, so there's a few things that happen in dreams. We do take off at night in order to replenish colors. This is interesting. Since we're all made of colors and sound, it looks like we get depleted of those during the day. And so one level of sleep is that we would, our conscious mind would stop thinking, you know, so long enough so that we can be renourished. Okay, so what's the second part of that, huh?
Can we use our dreams to create an amazing life? And if so, how?
Well, yeah, that goes under the heading of manifesting. And of course, there's a whole practice of lucid dreaming, which can be learned, and there's plenty of tapes out there to teach people how to lucid dream, which really is the process of waking yourself up while you're in a dream. It's almost like instead of just allowing yourself to sleep and drift, you know, keep your consciousness asleep. For example, lucid dreaming is where you actually become awake while you're in a dream place or a dream state, and you become an active participant in the dream. In other words, you change things around in the dream. You're guiding the outcome of a dream. And you can get yourself to a place where you are conscious enough to be visualizing or manifesting certain dream scenarios that you would like to experience in your 3D life. That does work, and there are people who do it. So I do believe it's a practice, and but it's called lucid dreaming, and anybody can learn to do that.
Do angels use our dreams to communicate with us?
Absolutely, as do your guides and teachers. I'll tell you a brief little story about that. It kind of makes the point. But I lost my sister a few years back, and she got this strange illness very fast, and she called me up one day, and she actually had been feeling better, and she said, I had 2 dreams of Chris in the last 2 nights. Now, Chris was my brother who died when he was 22, and no one has seen him, heard from him in spirit, communicated with him at all. And all of a sudden, she's having 2 dreams, and she told me that in the dream, she said to him, well, why are you showing up now? Or why haven't I seen you before? And he said, because you've always been so busy. But I think it makes the point, you see, that when we are awake in our 3D lives, we're busy thinking, we're busy working, we're busy processing. So our guides and teachers sometimes can't get the messages through. So they very often will use the dream state to get a message across. And so then that brings into the whole process of, when you wake up, writing your dreams down and taking a look at them. I am of the personal opinion that, ultimately everything in a dream is an aspect of yourself. So I look at dreams very symbolically, and the reason I started doing that was because, I'd have a dream that I would think was a bad dream, let's say. You wake up and you didn't like the experience, or you didn't like where you were, for example. And I'd have this emotional reaction to that. But when I actually started analyzing it from the perspective that everything in the dream is me, and everyone in the dream is me. So, in other words, if I started out the dream where I'm on a beach, I'd say, I am the beach, I am. And then I would describe what the beach meant to me. And then I'd go to the next thing that happened in the dream, and I'd make myself that. And if there were people in there that were doing things, I'd make myself that. And I would always come up with a very different message than when I woke up. Sometimes what I thought was a horrible dream turned out to be an incredible message. So I do think dreams are personal. I do think that each one's consciousness or spirit is making up things. And of course, there's levels of dreams where you're just processing the day's events. So I hope that answers that question.
Does gravity have any effect on our consciousness?
Wow, great question. Hang on. Does gravity... Let's see. Well, what I'm hearing is that gravity is the result of consciousness. And this is interesting because it basically is saying that gravity changes. Gravity changes by the consciousness of the mass. So in other words, our collective beliefs and ideas and levels of consciousness dictate how much gravity there is in a particular quote-unquote place. Okay, so gravity doesn't affect our consciousness. We actually affect gravity. So it's the other way around. I mean, think of it too. Another example is when people have images of ascending. We ascend out of gravity. We ascend out of time. It seems to be the ability to get beyond the gravitational field. But that only happens when your consciousness grows more and more towards truth. It becomes lighter and lighter, or it holds more and more light within it. And the more and more light you hold, the less gravity plays upon your body. So I hope that makes it really, really clear. Yeah. So that does mean if all of a sudden the consciousness of the planet started to wake up even more, this is a great question, because what they are showing me is that, let's take manifesting, for example. If a collective is in a really limited frame of consciousness or perception about reality, manifesting could be slow. It could be very slow. Okay. But what we have seen recently is that as more light comes into this planet, and people heal things and they heal beliefs and they awaken more to more truth, to more God truth, their manifesting seem to be happening almost instantaneously. Their desires don't seem to be subject to this slow linear movement. And that's another good example on how we actually affect the gravitational field and not the other way around.
How can we build wealth with our consciousness?
How can we build wealth? Okay. All right, so Source is basically saying there's levels to this answer. First of all, that it's really the alter ego that wants wealth, first of all. It can manifest wealth by its thoughts, by its visualizations of having wealth come to it, by looking at possibly limiting beliefs about wealth in yourself and changing those around, doing a little bit of exploration into your subconscious and also reprogramming yourself. Your powers of visualization are incredible, Source is saying. We underestimate the imagination and we underestimate the imagery that we create with our thoughts. So what Source is saying is wealth can be very easy. And I think we have a tendency of making it too much of a big deal. Okay. But it's putting it in perspective and saying that the material wealth that most people want to achieve on earth, it is a desire of the false self. There's nothing wrong with it. Having it and not having it can be part of your awakening journey. But there's so many stigmas about money and wealth and fears around it that we really have to look into those inside ourselves. We have to do some self-examining into what are our true fears about wealth, beliefs about wealth. What do we want it for? I mean, it's saying to do that piece, because it will determine what happens to you. In other words, if you just use your imagination to manifest wealth, you also need to define it in such a way where you stay in balance. Because what can happen is that if you don't clear out those subconscious ideas, there can be a point where it all turns on you, or that you lose it in some way. Or if you look at the people who become very wealthy and end up destroying their lives in some way through alcohol or drugs where they can't handle the wealth. So you need to kind of look at all these facets of yourself. So that's the material level of wealth. But, really what Source is saying, anything you can imagine can come into manifestation. Okay, just be aware, make sure you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Okay, again, nothing wrong with it at all. There's no judgment here. I don't feel any judgment. Source is on one hand saying, have a ball, go ahead and experience it. Okay, but the other part of a bigger wealth is the part where you get to a place where you love everything. Basically, true prosperity is when you're in communication with all life everywhere, where you are sensitive to life at very intimate levels, where you feel love and peace for everything and everyone inside yourself, that in that state, abundance happens naturally. So there's the two levels of it for you. I think the point it's making is that if you really got to be honest with yourself and ask yourself which level of consciousness you're at. Because if you're still in the consciousness of the alter ego, which wants to keep experiencing and wants to keep, has a perception that it's building itself and it's going to become more, or it's got its identity connected to what it has and what it accomplishes in the material world, then that's one type of wealth. And nothing wrong with it, but just acknowledge yourself where you are, because if you're heading toward the true ego, then you're headed toward understanding your I am self, which is really, the I am presence is knowing yourself as only love and as all that is. It's a very different type, very different goals, but either place, wherever you are, just make sure you're aware of that before you go do what you're going to do.
Do we interact with others when our bodies are asleep or when we're in an unconscious state? In other words, when we're dreaming, is it possible to interact with others?
All right, well, let's just first let's make sure we clear up the language here, because when you're dreaming, I wouldn't necessarily say we're unconscious. Not the way Source defined it earlier, where unconsciousness is us, basically denying who we are. Okay, or not wanting to know something. So I wouldn't say we're unconscious when we sleep. I would just say we're sleeping. Certain parts of the brain shut down, other parts of the brain turn on. So it's very possible to interact with others while you're dreaming. In fact, of course, you can be relating with people who've crossed over. You can also have somebody in 3D life, who you're doing this experiment with, and you're saying, let's meet ourselves in our dream state for the purpose of this or that, or let's just see if we could do it. So you can do all kinds of things in the dream state. So the answer to that is, you do interact with other people, and you can deliberately choose to.
Tell us the process of meditating, and why should we do it, and how does it work?
All right, well, let's see what Source says about meditation. So meditation, from what Source is saying, is really the decision to know yourself more. I'm going to explain this too, because there's so many different levels of meditating. I mean, it depends what you're doing it for. Some people like Ahonu here has learned transcendental meditation early on, and he was looking for peace, after the death of his son. So he went in and wanted to learn to meditate by going to this place of peace inside himself. So he used it for that. When I used to meditate, what I would do is I would go in my room when my children were taking naps. I'd call on my higher self. I'd just lay on my bed. I wasn't sitting up. I'd lay down on my bed, and I wanted knowledge. I didn't want peace. I wanted knowledge. I wanted esoteric, mystical knowledge. So I laid down on my bed. I made a quiet prayer to my higher self and asked it to come and teach me. And then I waited. And first few days I didn't really have anything happen, but I kept at it, and I always made it the same time every day, and I always had the same intention. And after, let's say 3 or 4 days, I started seeing colors, and those colors would give me a feeling. And then I'd go from colors to seeing symbols appear. And I would go ask myself what those symbols seemed to be saying to me. And then it ended up where it evolved. Let's say it evolved to my meditations, where I went on journeys. I went to other dimensions. I met with my higher self. I'd be in a classroom where my higher self was teaching about 100 people, and I recognized they were all me. I've gone to other levels and planetary systems because that's what I wanted. I wanted knowledge, and I practiced it. I made the time for it, and I waited. Okay, made an intention and waited. So that's another way. I guess the point I'm making is a lot of your meditation can depend on what your intentions are, and I can tell you 100% that whatever you ask for will be answered. 100%, whatever you ask for will be answered. So if you go into a meditation and you have an intention, and really what a meditation is you're setting aside quiet time to commune inwardly. Whether that, like I say, whether the inward is just to let all your mind, all your thoughts come in and drift away and arrive at a peaceful center, and that takes practice too. Or if it's for knowledge or whatever, that's another intention. But really what meditation is you're making a decision to take the time to investigate or come to a place that you're not experiencing in your outer world. It's easy. I don't find meditation complicated. I think it's just a practice. It's setting aside time and putting yourself in a quiet, receptive place, and don't judge the thoughts. You know, when you start to make an intention to be quiet, you'll have all these thoughts coming in and out, racing in and out, and you don't have to do anything with them. You don't have to throw them out. You just let them come in and go. Just let them come in and go and watch them, because there'll all of a sudden be a point where there aren't any more, and you'll just naturally arrive at this still place, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, if I could just give my input there, and I'm not in the record, so let that be clear. It's just from my own experience. I've been taught and learnt myself through over 20 years of meditating that there are, as Aingeal Rose says, several different ways and types, and a lot of them are contemplation and others are concentration. And the contemplating type is where you might contemplate scripture, for example, or you might contemplate, I don't know, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, or various types of religious or sacred objects, that kind of thing. And then concentration, of course, is another method where you might concentrate on your breathing, or you might concentrate on a flame, a candle flame, or some object. Now, where TM is different is only because it doesn't contemplate or concentrate. It basically tries to make the mind blank by by focusing on a mantra in the short term until it arrives at a nothingness. And so there are differences in all these ways. And as Aingeal Rose said, there is no right way, there is no wrong way. There's no judgment about it, as long as your purpose and you're clear about your purpose for meditating, because that basically determines its effect.
Great advice, Ahonu.
Okay, our next question. While we are in a conscientious state, what actions does Source tell us will build a life of fulfillment and joy?
Could you repeat that, Ahonu?
While we are in a... Now, this person has actually written conscientious. While we are in a conscientious state, what actions does Source tell us will build a life of fulfillment and joy?
All right. Well, actions is an interesting word, because I'm actually not seeing having to do anything specific, but what I am seeing... Just lost it. I hate that when it goes in and out so fast. So just a second. A life of fulfillment and joy only happens when you can truly love yourself. Again, that's not airy-fairy, because what Source is saying is that you will not be able to have a life of fulfillment and joy until you do. Basically because whenever you don't love yourself on any level, or you make choices that are self-destructive or not in your highest good, there's always guilt and fear attached on some subconscious level. There's associations that are made with not deserving and hurting yourself. And it could be small things. I mean, it could be things you do every day that you know you're not making the highest choice for yourself. It could be on any level of your life, really, where you're not loving yourself. Okay, so the thing is that loving yourself is a huge piece to the puzzle on your way to becoming harmless. And harmlessness is really what gives us a life of fulfillment, because we become in love with everything. And that's what joy actually is being in love with everything. All right, where you look out and you see beauty and you're not upset over things. Inside of you, you know that everything's all right, everything's well. All right, so the actions to take, again, for that are really the willingness to look at the alter ego. Because the alter ego, I mean, it's inevitable that the alter ego is going to die. It has to. It has to at some point in your conscious evolution. The pretend self, the self we make up, the self that we measure, the self that we look at our outer world. So let's say, for example, in that question that you're asking, there could be, well, I'll be happy and fulfilled when this happens, or I'll be happy and fulfilled when I have that, or happiness and fulfillment means, I have all the money and relationship and beautiful home that I want. That's happiness and fulfillment. But those are all alter ego perceptions, because the truth is that, of course, you can enjoy life much better by having some of those things. But remember, the journey of the consciousness is that there is always going to be a point where that inner gnawing is going to come back. And that inner gnawing is going to want to take you. It's inherent inside you. It's going to want to take you to the next level. And ultimately, that level is going to end up a spiritual level. Okay, that's just the way it works. So to have a life of fulfillment, one level source is saying, you got to realize this is a dream. We're in a dreamscape. Okay, and that alone, that realization alone, can actually relieve a lot of unhappiness. Okay, now it's not denying that things happen in the dream, quote unquote, but what it's saying is, let's put it in perspective, because we're making up perceptions as we go along, and they arise and they fall, and they rise and they fall. And this is the reason why, as long as we're in the alter ego, we're always going to see things as temporary. There's going to be nothing that lasts. And ultimately, the alter ego doesn't last. Okay, so there's no happiness in the alter ego. There's no lasting happiness in the alter ego and all of its accomplishments and losses. There's no joy and happiness there, precisely because what we're all really looking for is love. And I'm talking not love in relationships, but love as the only true reality. And that's what the I Am presence is. I hope that clears it up for you.
What is the relationship between our brain and the higher self? How does it work as it relates to a conscious physical body operated by a spiritual being?
This person needs to buy my book, Ahonu. The next book has a whole chapter on the brain. In fact, I will give you a little bit of that info because it answers your question. We did a night in Ireland on the brain, and we thought we were going to examine all the different lobes and find out what they all did. And instead, the image we got was that the brain, try to picture it as a big clear bubble. I could see through it, and I wasn't seeing lobes. I was watching electrical firings going back and forth. It was like this hollow network with all these wires, connecting to each other, and lighting here, lighting there, firings going off all over the place. And here's the connection. We have a spirit self, okay? We have an individuated spirit, and that is each one of us has individuated a spirit essence, and that is the self that is on the journey. Your individuated spirit self is not self-realized at this point. Okay, now what is self-realized is the ultimate state of unity with God. That is there. That's the I am self I'm talking about. But the individuated spirit observes and learns. So it is actually the part of us that wants to have experiences. I'm not going to call it the alter ego. I'm going to say it's the part of us on a journey, because the alter ego is when we forget that we're a spirit and we forget what we're doing and we make up a whole other persona. Okay, so that's the alter ego. I need to be clear. Now, you have a part of you that's called a higher self. Other people might call it the Holy Spirit. Certainly the Course in Miracles would call it the Holy Spirit inside your mind. So it's not talking about a Holy Spirit out there. It's talking about a Holy Spirit as a part of your own makeup, let's just say, your own makeup, that can bridge the gap between the person down here who's perceiving certain things and a higher state of truth. So let's call the higher self the Holy Spirit that bridges a gap. Okay. But what actually happens in the process, you see, is that you have an individuated spirit who goes through experiences, has conclusions, and sends those conclusions down to the mind field. The mind field is really a substance. It's a substance that takes thought or beliefs and turns them into concepts or solidifies them in some way. So in other words, it says it takes its command from the spirit. It says, okay, fine, spirit, you've decided this about life, or you've come to this conclusion. I'm going to coalesce that now, and I'm going to turn it into an idea or a concept. And in other words, I'm going to solidify it on a level. And then that concept gets sent to the brain. The brain says, okay, that means I have to fire this way for that belief, and I have to create these chemicals to match that belief and these hormones, and then they get sent to the body. So the brain is really just a transmitting and relay station. That is all it is. It's moldable. There's no limit to the types of firings and chemicals and hormones it can create, but it's all dependent upon the signals it gets from the mind, and the mind gets its signals from the individuated spirit. And the Holy Spirit, again, is something built into us that allows us to bridge the gap between levels all the way up to the recognition. And there's a point where you're not going to use the higher self as a bridge, because, on your journey, as your consciousness is awakening to more God realization, and you start to become that God self more and more, that need for the intermediary disappears. Okay? You actually have direct cognition, between yourself and Source.
Would Source consciousness exist without our consciousness?
That's an interesting question. Source is laughing in a fun way, okay, at that question. All right. So yes, it would. Yes, it is not dependent on our consciousness at all. It's saying that it is before any of us were.
What gives us the ability to communicate with trees?
Good question. Let's see. What gives us the ability to communicate with trees? Well, what the trees are saying is they want to communicate with us. I think that's an interesting answer. So let me go into that more, because it does imply that communication is a two-way street. Okay, so just a second. Well, you see, we all have the ability to communicate with anything. We can communicate with rocks. We can actually see the whole history of the universe by picking up a stone and being able to communicate with it, for example. So we have built into us the ability to communicate with everything. I think what it's saying is that not everything wants to have a conversation. There are plenty of things that do want to have a conversation. And I think, again, this is being aware of a level of information, getting yourself, let's say, to a place where you're at a level of the ability to receive information from everything in life. But I really get the feeling that a lot of trees want to talk to us. Same would be true of crystals or other things.
Yeah, in fact, we should let people know, Aingeal Rose, that we did a very valuable session one time in Ireland about the trees, and it led to a fabulous booklet. And we must try and get that published, actually, because it is really, really astonishing information about the trees. Yeah.
They actually requested to talk to us. We were actually doing a group on Atlantis and Lemuria, and it was in the Lemurian energy, with the Lemurians saying they were never physical beings, was interesting but they said they did bring a lot of the plant life they seeded a lot of the plant life on the planet. They seeded the trees, and that the trees have, a lot of trees, I won't say all trees, a lot of trees have Lemurian energy inside of them. I thought that was really fantastic. And so as we were getting that information, all of a sudden the trees popped up and said, yeah, and we want to talk to you. So that was the next week's subject. Remember, Ahonu?
That's right.
It was incredibly fascinating. I do have the transcript of that. I think I planned on putting it in one of the books. I just haven't done it yet, but it was incredible. Absolutely incredible night.
Yeah. Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I'd really like to squeeze in this last question because, as always, we like to try and give practical information to people. And this next question asks that question about how can we become more conscious? What are the practical things that we can do, Aingeal Rose, to grow in awareness and become more conscious?
All right. Well, let me ask Source. I have my opinion, but then let me ask Source just a second. Well, Source says really the very first thing, and it is practical, is to really have the desire to know yourself. And it sounds like it's not a practical answer, but it really is, because we have to remember that what comes to us in our perceptual field is a result of our desires and our thoughts. All right. So, for myself, I think I learned a lot through the meditating, but I also journaled an awful lot, and you're probably sick to death of hearing me talk about journaling. But Sandra Ray, at the time, who was one of the developers of Rebirthing, she had this workbook that was just all questions. And back at the time, I was so interested in finding out about myself. I was interested in knowing what was in the content of my subconscious, because I came to the place where I realized I didn't even know truly what I believed and thought. And that would still be true to this day. There's probably a lot I'm not aware that I think. I got her workbook and I started answering those questions. And that's actually what led me to teach transformational writing classes, because each week, Source would dictate questions to present to the class for them to ask themselves. And they answered those questions. And if you ever want a fast way to know about yourself, just sit down and start asking questions. And you can begin with anything you're going through in your life. In other words, if you have something going on that's not what you want to be experiencing, you just start with a question and ask yourself, what does this situation mean to me? What do I think is going to happen in it? What do I want to happen in it? You have to start inquiring. If you wake up one morning and you find that you're in a really funky mood, and yet there's nothing that you can be aware of that would cause that, you sit down and you say, what's this mood about? What am I feeling? Because the thing is that our minds and our consciousness, things happen so quickly in them that we can't catch them all. There's awareness is happening all the time, decisions being made that we're not aware of. So if you really want to shift your consciousness, a lot of it does have to do with your desire. For myself, I've just always wanted to know. I'm a researcher. I'm a seeker. I wanted answers. I want to know. And that's been my modus operandi since I've been in my 20s. And everything I've learned, or experienced, it would take me to another query or another level of wanting to know. So I did meditate. I've done a lot of healing modalities that clear the subconscious or help release emotional trauma. I've gone through lots of emotional trauma in my life. So I would go to a healer who could help me with that, or I would write about it. And I think ultimately self-honesty is crucial, because we have to be willing to be very, very, very honest with the truth. And the truth is that all of us have a dark side. All of us have a side that's not nice and is judgmental and can even be hateful. We all have it. So you have to be willing to take a look at the truth of yourself, the good and the bad and the ugly. And I also found by journaling, here's an example. I remember one day I had a backache. So I decided I was going to sit down and write about the backache. So I just started out by saying, I described the backache first. Painful, it's irritating, it's sensitive, I described it, okay? And then I asked myself what having back pain meant to me. And then I would let that come down. And just that inquiry alone took me into 5 pages of past life memories. All of a sudden, these memories came. And the thing about journaling is you can't censor anything. Even if it doesn't seem to make sense, if what you're writing is contradictory, it doesn't matter. You just let it all come out. And the main thing is don't censor, don't analyze, just let whatever starts to come. because by the time I was done that journaling, not only did I have no backache, but I totally understood its relationship to something going on in my current life at the time. And I also understood that there were patterns in there from other lives. So those are a few suggestions that I can give you.
All right, let's run through a quick summary here. We have gone over time, but that's okay, by way of a gesture to give you good value, as always. So let's just do a quick rundown of what we've covered today. Consciousness is the ability to know God. Consciousness is the ability to be alive and aware, and to perceive and to extend and to receive order, structure, knowledge, and love. Consciousness originated from Source, from the I Am. The I Am is Source's definition of itself. We think from our I Am presence. One of the qualities of the I Am presence is the ability to think. There is a part of us inherent in us that has the ability to think. The mind is the alter ego and is the mechanism of perception. It is the alter ego that desires wealth. It is the mind, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. The mind came into being from varying degrees of self-awareness. There are varying levels of consciousness. The true ego is the self that Source created. The alter ego is what gets created through limited perceptions. You need awareness to become self-realized. True reality is the I Am Self. Our views of reality are mind-dependent. Reality and activity are an aspect of manifesting. We draw conclusions from our experiences that form our reality. The subconscious is what we have decided but are not aware of. The unconscious is that which denies what is. Divine inspiration and our own perceptions determine what we think about. Thinking works by awakening to consciousness. Being aware of thoughts comes from an awakening consciousness. Thinking is generated by light and sound. Most animals think but are not aware of formulating thought to actively decide. Some plants have the ability to think but not reason. Most things have history but not consciousness. Awakening to the truth of who we really are is the basis of the historical maxim, know thyself. Our consciousness is always being acted upon by external sources until we grow in awareness to the I Am. The realization of our true self is something we come to on our own. There is no judgment from Source if you take forever to grow in awareness. The journey's end is when you realize your true self. Until we decide to go home, we will perceive we are on a journey or on a path. Being done with the perception of experiences is the awareness of Source. Dreams are the ability of our spirit self to leave the body. Dreams are necessary to replenish our colors and our sound. Dreams are necessary to stop thinking so that we can replenish our bodies. Lucid dreaming is a growth to experiencing awareness. Angels, guides, and teachers use dreams to communicate with us. Everything in your dreams is an aspect of yourself. Dreams are personal. Gravity is a result of consciousness. Gravity changes by the mass consciousness. Our collective consciousness dictates the amount of gravity in a system. We affect gravity, not the other way around. Holding more light overcomes gravity. Overcoming gravity, that is, becoming lighter, speeds manifesting. We underestimate the power of imagery that we create with our thoughts. Self-examination of our fears will determine a growth outcome. Clearing out self-conscious ideas of wealth and material acquisition is a growth towards loving everything. Loving all life everywhere is our natural abundant state. Having your identity connected to an outcome is an aspect of the alter ego. We are not unconscious when we are dreaming. It is possible to interact with others while dreaming. Meditation is the decision to know yourself. Being clear about your purpose for meditating determines its effect. Whatever you ask for in meditation will be answered. Loving yourself is a step on the way to becoming harmless. Joy is being in love with everything. The willingness to look at your alter ego is a necessary growth of awareness towards joy. Realizing we are in a dreamscape puts a lot of perceptions into perspective. The alter ego will ultimately die as it contains no joy or happiness. Love is the only true reality. The individuated self is not God realized at this level. The individuated self is what desires experiences. The higher self is the Holy Spirit inside your mind and can bridge the gap to a higher state of truth. The brain is a moldable transmitter of signals from the mind. Source consciousness is not dependent on our consciousness. Trees want to communicate with us, and that communication is a two-way street. We can see the entire history of our universe in a stone. Not everything in our perceptions wants to have a conversation with us. What comes into our perceptions is the result of our thoughts and desires. Transformational writing or journaling is a fast way to know yourself. Asking yourself, what does this situation mean to me, is a great way to uncover deep unconscious desires that will shift your awareness. Self-honesty is crucial for the growth of awareness. And in your journaling, don't censor or analyze.
All right, I'm going to close the records now. I want to thank you all for putting up with us today. We promise no new experimental procedures next week. If you do join in next week, we will be asking Source about twin flames and soulmates, and indeed anything about relationships that you would like to ask. Amen, amen, amen. And do feel free to email us about today, if how you found it, if you have extra questions, if there was anything you didn't understand. We welcome your feedback. So we love you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Remember to enter your comments on worldofempowerment.com. We appreciate your patience and understanding with us, and we love you all so much. Until next week, blessings from myself, Ahonu, and from Aingeal Rose.